dealing with IAS 40, investment properties. There's a picture. What do you see in front of you? What do you see in the slide in front of you? Anyone? What you see in the slide in front of you?
Property.
Okay. Property. What is the nature of the property? What's the nature of that property? I'm waiting. What's the nature of the property?
The property is on for rent, sir.
All right. The property has is put up for rent. It's a house that is for rent. Okay. So we've done the last topic that we did was property, plant, and equipment. And there we defined what property, plant, and equipment is. But not all property, plant, and equipment will be not all property, let's say in this instance a house, will be classified as under IAS 16 as property, plant, and equipment. We can change the classification, or it can be classified as something else based on the use of that property. So in this instance, we have a property in front of us, and there's a for rent sign. So we can assume that this house is going to be rented out. And because this house is going to be rented out, we cannot classify it using IAS 16 property, plant, and equipment. We'll have to use IAS 40 investment property, which is the topic that we are starting with today. So what are the learning outcomes of this unit? You should be able to define investment property. You should be able to distinguish between owner-occupied property and investment property. You should be able to account for joint use properties. And finally, you should be able to account for ancillary services that are related to the properties. Okay, I've posted a link to a video that gives an overview of investment property. So you should watch that video. So after the class, you can go and watch the video. It's less than 10 minutes. It gives you a very good overview of the IAS 40 investment property. So just follow the link in the slides. So let's look at what is meant by investment property. What do you think, just by looking at the words investment property, what would you think it is? What would you think is meant by investment property just by looking at the words investment property? I'll only move on once I get input. I'm waiting for you. What do you think is investment property? What is meant by investment property? Okay, one more minute and then I'm dismissing the class if we have no cooperation. What is meant by investment property?
They are like assets that are held for rentals or for appreciation, capital appreciation.
Okay, Matthias. I think Mercy wanted to add something. Go ahead, Mercy. You can unmute your mic. Mercy, you can unmute your mic and speak. And Sarah mentions that it's a building for rental purposes, but not for production purposes. All right. One important thing when looking at the standard on IAS 16 is that we are looking here specifically at land and buildings. We're not looking at other types of property such as equipment. We're not looking at vehicles. So investment property would be defined as land and buildings or both, or a part of a building that is held by the owner or the lessee as a right of use asset. So when we say is held by the owner owns it, right? Or it can be held by a lessee, all right? So someone has leased it out to you. You are the lessee and you have the right to use that asset, all right? And what is the asset going to be used for? It can be used to earn rentals. So think of the property is used to earn rentals. It can be used for capital appreciation or for both. Capital appreciation just means you're going to keep that property in the hope that it increases in value. All right, that is it. It is not property that is held for use in the production or supply of goods or services or for administrative purposes. Those are dealt with under IAS 16. So it's not land and buildings that will be used in the supply or production of goods or services. So it's not a manufacturing building, for instance, and it's not used for administrative purposes. All right. If it's any of those, that is dealt with under IAS 16 property, plant and equipment. Further, the property is not held for sale in the ordinary course of business. Any property that is held for sale in the ordinary course of business is dealt with under IAS 2, which is the standard on inventories. All right, so it's not houses that, let's say, a developer has that they hold for the purpose of resale. All right, so let us go to owner occupied property. Owner occupied property is actually property that is dealt with in terms of IAS 16, property, plant and equipment. This is property that is held by the owner or held by the lessee as a right of use asset and is used in the production or supply of goods or services or for administration purposes. For example, administration buildings, factory buildings, employee housing, owner occupied property awaiting disposal. All right. So this owner occupied property, most of this would be classified under IAS 16 as property, plant, and equipment. However, owner-occupied property that is held awaiting disposal may be classified using IFRS 5, which is non-current assets held for sale. Non-current assets held for sale will be the last standard that we're going to deal with this semester. So we've already dealt with IAS 16, property, plant, and equipment. All right. But it might be that other owner-occupied property may meet the criteria to be classified as non-current assets held for sale. So we know that investment property is not owner-occupied property. So what are examples of investment property? Property that is held for long-term capital appreciation. You've bought property and you're just keeping it with the hope that it increases in value. It can be a building that is subsequently, okay, a building that is owned by the entity or is held as a right of use asset by a lessee and is subsequently leased out under an operating lease. So you can think of it, let us say you have a property, maybe a property was donated to you or you inherited a property and then you decide to rent out that property. All right, you rent out, so you lease it out. All right. And when we talk about operating leases, finance leases, you don't have to worry about that now since we're not really going to deal with leases this semester. A vacant building held with the intention to lease it out under an operating lease. So that's just an empty building that you intend to lease out or to rent out. You can replace the word lease with rent if you understand it better. Property that is constructed or developed for future use as an investment property. So you can think of it, you've bought land and now you want to construct, let's say, a block of flats in order to rent out those flats. So even during the construction process or during the developmental process, you can classify that land as investment property. Property that is being redeveloped for continued use as an investment property. All right. So you might have had property that was owner occupied. It was a house. You classified it under IAS 16, and then you change the use of the property. You redevelop it, and because you want to now rent it out and use it as investment property, then that property will be uh, classified as investment property. Land whose use is undecided. So if you have vacant land, but you do not have a purpose for that vacant land, you haven't made a decision as to what you're going to do with that vacant land, that land will be classified as investment property and not as property, plant, and equipment under IAS 16. Are there any questions? Someone says they can't hear. All right, someone, at least Mercy said you can hear. I don't know what is happening. Those people that cannot hear, just unmute your mic and mute it again. Okay. Let me just write in the chat. Maybe they will not be able to hear. Okay. So if you unmute and mute, then you should be able to hear me. Okay. Can you hear? Can you hear me now? Those that could not hear? Those that could not hear, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? All right, maybe it's a problem with the network. Who can hear me?
I can.
Okay, Mercy can hear me. So if she can hear me, I'm assuming that the others can hear me as well. I'm assuming that the others can hear me as well. I don't know what is wrong with those that cannot hear. Maybe you'll just have to watch, maybe exit. Okay, exit and re-enter us. Okay, so those I've just written it in the chat. Just exit and re-enter the class. Okay, because others can hear me. Others can hear me. All right, let us move on. I guess those that cannot hear will just re-enter the class and hopefully they'll be able to hear me as we go ahead. Right. Now let us look at joint use properties. Joint use properties are properties that are used for multiple purposes. A portion of that property can be used for capital appreciation or to earn rentals, and then another property can be used for administrative purposes or in the production or supply of goods or services. Those that are used in the production or supply of goods or services or for administration purposes will be classified as PPE, and the portion that is used for capital appreciation or to earn rentals will be classified as um, investment property. However, the two portions may need to be classified separately. And this is what we are going to answer. When will it be classified separately? There's a question. Can the portions be sold or leased out separately? All right. Can it be sold or leased out separately? All right. We can just ignore the part where we talk about under a finance lease. So if the portions can be sold or leased out separately, you can account for the portion separately. The portion that you're going to use um, as a building, let us say used for administrative purposes, would be classified as uh, under IAS 16 as property, plant and equipment. And then the portion that, um, or the part that is rented out, can be rented out separately, will be classified as investment property. All right. If you cannot sell or lease the portions of the property separately, and the owner occupied property is insignificant, then the entire property is classified as investment property. So think of it this way. Let us say you have a building and 90% of the building is rented out, while 10% of the building is used by the owners for offices. Then that property, since it cannot be sold separately, right, that whole property will be classified as investment property. However, all right, if the owner occupied property portion is significant, so let us say 90% of the property is used by the business for administrative purposes, and they only rent 10% of the property out, then that entire property would be classified as PPE. Now, how do you determine whether a portion is significant or insignificant? The standard IAS 40.4 determines that judgment must be used in determining what constitutes an insignificant portion. For your purposes, you will be told that it is insignificant or it is significant. All right. If you're not given that information, you have to look at the scenario to determine whether an insignificant portion is used as on for administrative purposes or whether it's a significant portion. So IAS 16 does not give a percentage. It does not say that if 40% of the property is used for administrative purposes, then that's significant. It doesn't give a percentage. So judgment needs to be used to determine what is really significant. All right, judgment needs to be used to determine what is significant. Um, I don't know what is happening. I still see some messages in the chat. People cannot hear me. Uh, Let me reshare the link. Let me reshare the meeting link for those that cannot hear me. I cannot find. I cannot find the link to reshare. Okay. I'm just resharing the link on WhatsApp. There's some people that are having problems. Those that are in class now, can you hear me? Rudolph, Simaneka, Dylan, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, miss.
Mr., not Miss. All right, so
Miss.
that was area. All right, so I guess it's a problem. Those people that cannot hear, I guess it's a problem on your side. But let us move on. I've tried my best. Otherwise, they can watch the recording. Okay, so let us move on. Let us look. We have two houses. They're the small, narrow houses. These ones can be sold separately. All right. So if the property is going to be used for rental or capital appreciation, let us look at the house on the left. You classify that whole property as investment property because it's separately saleable. Property on the right is also separately saleable. However, the property on the right is used for the production or supply of goods or services or for administration purposes. That property is classified under IAS 16 investment property. So we have two separately saleable properties with different uses. These properties can be classified differently. The one for rental or capital appreciation can be classified as investment property or will be classified as investment property. The one that is going to be used for in the supply or production of goods or services or for administration purposes will be classified under IAS 16 as owner-occupied properties. Let's look at example 1. A Limited owns two freestanding buildings on adjoining sites in Klein Windhoek. One, which is building A, is used as A Limited's administrative office, and the other one, building B, is rented out to X Limited in terms of an operating lease agreement for 4 years. How will you classify these two buildings? How will you classify building A and how will you classify building B? So remember, these two buildings are freestanding buildings, but they are on adjoining sites. So they're next to each other. How will you classify building A and how will you classify building B? Anyone? How do you classify building A and how do you classify building B?
So building A will be classified as an owner's property, and then building B will be classified as an investment property.
All right, exactly. So building A is owner occupied. It's going to be treated in terms of IAS 16, property, plant and equipment. And building B, since it's being rented out, that meets the definition of investment property and it will be treated in terms of IAS 40, investment property. Now we look at this image. We have a single house with different uses. This is called a joint use property. Now, if you look at this house, the bigger portion of the house is used for rental or capital appreciation. So where my pointer is in red, that portion is used for rental or capital appreciation, and the smaller portion is used for in the production or supply of goods or services or for administrative purposes. And we are told that the smaller portion is an insignificant in relation to the total property. So when this happens, you have this whole building, but an insignificant portion is used for production or supply of goods or services or for administrative purposes, and the rest of the property is being rented out or is used for capital appreciation, then this whole property, the whole property will be classified as investment property. All right, so this whole house will be classified as investment property. Let us look at example 2. B Limited owns a building in Avis. The building consists of 10 floors. 9 of the floors are rented out to various lessees in terms of operating lease agreements. And the top floor is used by the entity itself for offices of its executives. How would you classify building B? Is building B going to be classified in terms of IAS 40 investment property, or will it be classified in terms of IAS 16 property, plant and equipment? How will building B be classified? Anyone? How do you classify building B? Meke, how will you classify building B? Meke Ingo, how do you classify building B? You are spending too much time. I need your input. How will you classify building B?
As an investment property.
An investment property. Yes. Um, so although this is a joint use property, because the majority of the building, we can say 90%. We say this building 9 floors are rented out, while the top floor is used by the entity for its executive. So the top floor is used as offices. So in this, we're using our judgment. We're determining that the majority of this building is actually rented out. And it looks like it's a significant portion because it's 90% of the building, 9 out of 10 floors. That's 90% of the building is rented out. So in this instance, it meets the definition of a joint use property, but since a significant portion is rented out, this entire property will be classified as investment property, to be classified as investment property. Now let us look at the scenario where you have a house, again, but a small portion, a small part of the house is used for rental or capital appreciation, and the bigger portion of the house is used in the production or supply of goods or services or for administrative purposes. In this instance, this whole house will be classified as owner occupied property. So we look at example C. So this house here will be classified as owner occupied property in terms of IAS 16, property, plant and equipment. Okay, let's look at example 3. C Limited uses a house as its offices. 6 of the 8 rooms are used for administrative offices, and 2 rooms are leased out to another company in terms of an operating lease. Okay, so you look at your house, you can think of it, let us say you have a 6-bedroom house, or you have an 8-bedroom house, and 6 of the rooms are used by you and your family, and then you rent out 2 rooms. How would you classify that entire house? How would you classify that house? Anyone? Is this an investment property? Will this one be an investment property? So what we have to use here, again, it's a joint use property, but we have to determine what is the significant use of this property. In this instance, it seems as if the majority of the property is used for administrative purposes. That's the information that is given us to us. So 6 rooms are used for administrative purposes and 2 rooms are leased to another company as an operating lease. Since we cannot sell this, since the 2 rooms cannot be sold separately, right? They cannot be split from the entire house. It's a joint use property. But in this instance, this house will be classified as owner occupied property in terms of IAS 16, since the significant portion is owner occupied and is used for administrative purposes. All right, it's owner occupied and used for administrative purposes, so it will be treated in terms of IAS 16. So one thing I want you to note that yes, it's okay to say owner occupied property, but because it's owner occupied property, then you must specify that it will be treated in terms of IAS 16. All right. However, if it is property that is rented out, and that was a significant portion, that meets the definition of investment property, and it will be treated in terms of IAS 40. Okay, so you're going to reinforce the principles on joint use property by doing example 1 on page 514 of Gripping Up. So that is what you will do for homework. just to reinforce.
Repeat,
Yes, you have a
repeat the
question.
page number.
It's page 514. It's in the slides. Gripping Up 21st edition. That is page 514. Okay. So you'll get the notes. I'll post them on e-learning. Oh, these notes should actually already be on e-learning. All right, just on Teams, I will add the topic onto Teams. Let us look at ancillary services. Let us look at ancillary services. And this is the last part that we are going to deal with respect to IAS 40. So ancillary services, these are other services that may be provided, such as security and maintenance services. All right, such as security or maintenance services. Again, with ancillary services, you have to determine, are these services significant or insignificant to the arrangement as a whole? If the ancillary services are insignificant to the whole arrangement, then you will classify the property as investment property. However, it might be that the ancillary services are significant. Then you have to choose on what basis will you classify those that property. So you might have to classify it in terms of IAS 16 property, plant and equipment if those services are considered to be significant, or if the entity is exposed to significant variations of cash flows. All right. So if it's significant, or if the entity is exposed to significant variations of cash flows due to the services, then you might have to classify it in terms of IAS 16. Well, explain this with examples. All right. So we said if the ancillary services that are provided are insignificant, then we can classify the whole property as investment property. So we have a house here. This building is leased to an occupant, so it's rented out to an occupant. But in terms of the agreement, you provide security and maintenance services. You provide security and maintenance services. So you can think of it, let's say, in terms of complexes, right? Where you have various houses in a complex, and so that whole complex is owned by one company. Let us assume that the whole complex is owned by one company. You have different properties in that complex, and you provide security services and maintenance services to the whole complex, to the complex as a whole. So if the security services and this maintenance services are not significant to the arrangement, that whole complex will be classified as investment property, because the main thing is that you're not providing security. Your main focus of the business is not security services, right? You're renting out property to different occupants or different tenants, but you just happen to provide security services to those people that might rent out your property. All right. So if those services are
So what do they
insignificant,
mean by insignificant?
pardon?
What do they mean by insignificant?
Insignificant just means that it is not, it doesn't determine in relation to the income that you're going to get. The income that you're going to get from providing, let's say, that security services is not a significant portion if you compare it to the amount that you're going to get from actually leasing the house. So for example, you might rent out a house and you're going to say the rent is 4,800, right? Or you'll say the rent is, let's say, 5,000 in total, but that 5,000 includes 200 for security. So the tenant will pay 200 for security services. So you as the owner will go and get out of the security, you hire a security company, etc. The small $200 portion that is paid for the rent, you're going to use that to pay the security company. All right. So if you look at that, the whole value of the security services is not significant compared to what you're going to get from the rental. Okay. And it's not a major part of the business. You could still rent out that property without providing security services. All right. It doesn't really impact the main service that you're going to provide. And that's where we talk about that service is insignificant. Okay. It's not really that important to the whole arrangement. Are we together? Okay, I assume that we are together. All right. Now let's look at this. Again, you have a house, but in this scenario, the entity provides significant services or to the occupants of the properties. So if those services are significant to the arrangement as a whole, this property will be classified as owner occupied property. All right, so let's look at this example. We have a house here, and we're going to use this house as a guest house. All right. Now, what happens is that you're responsible for booking the people. You're treating it as a bed and breakfast. You're responsible for making the breakfast, ensuring all your tenants have breakfast. You're responsible for cleaning the property. You're responsible for making sure that your guests are basically well taken care of. So you're running a bed and breakfast. Now this property, what you are doing to operate the bed and breakfast, would you call that significant or insignificant to the arrangement? Will you call it significant or insignificant? The things that you have to do in order to make sure that bed and breakfast is operating. Is it significant or is it insignificant? Anyone? We have a few minutes left. Let us finish this. I want to finish this example, so please let us please cooperate. The services that you provide in order to run the bed and breakfast. Go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you. You may go ahead.
No, sir, I was saying repeat the question. I can't see the slide, Yash.
You can't see the slide. Can you see the slides now? So what I was saying is that you have a guest house. You provide bread and breakfast in that guest house. You are responsible for all the bookings. You're responsible for cleaning the guest house. You're basically responsible for making sure that the guests or the patrons to the property are actually well taken care of. So all of those things that you're performing, like making breakfast, doing the bookings, cleaning, repairs, etc. Is it significant to the whole arrangement? Is it significant? Can the hotel run?
Yes.
All right. So it's significant, all right, because that bed and breakfast, let us say, cannot run without those services. So if it's significant and you were saying that that bed and breakfast will not be able to run without all that input, then we're saying that this house or this building that you have cannot be treated as investment property, and it must be considered as owner occupied property because the services that are provided are significant to the arrangement. However, let me give you another example. I assume you've heard of an Airbnb. Have you heard of Airbnb? So Airbnb, um, it's a company that's it's basically web-based. They provide a service. So what happens is that you can list your property on Airbnb. So you can list your house on Airbnb. People can come and rent it out, right? They come and rent it out, let's just say for a day, for 2 days, etc. Things like that. And all you are responsible for is making sure that they get the keys, right? When they check in, and that they return the keys when they leave. Everything else is self-service. All right. So you do not provide you do not provide any breakfast for them. They make their own breakfast. You might have your utensils, etc. The property might be fully furnished, so they can do anything in that property. So now what is happening? You are just providing a property that is being rented out. All right. You are not providing other services such as um, breakfast for them. Okay. So everything else they're going to do on their own. So if what you provide them, you might say that you have cleaning services. Maybe a cleaner can come every 3 days to clean the property or so. It depends on how long your guests are there. All right. But everything else they do on their own. So basically that property, what you're using that property is to gain rentals. And what you're providing, your service that you're providing to them is very insignificant to the whole arrangement. In that instance, that property, you will classify that property as investment property. It's different from a bed and breakfast now where you have to cater for every need of the guests. All right. So you have to look at other services that you provided, significant or insignificant to the arrangement. All right. I think let us end here for today. What I want you to do, the only 4 more slides, and these slides have examples. Go through all of the slides. So this is example 3 in gripping up. Do example 3 in gripping up on page 516. Okay, so this gripping up page 516, I'm referring to the 21st edition, the 21st edition. All right, do example 3, and then we'll discuss that tomorrow. Are there any questions? Are there any questions?
So I just wanted to ask,
Go ahead.
so I wanted to ask what did you say IAS to what falls under that?
IS2 is inventories. You have to learn the standards. By now you should be getting to know the standards. IS2 is inventories. That is property. So in the example that I gave you, I gave property, let's just say a developer that has built properties for the purpose of resale, right? So in that instance, those
Oh,
houses will be classified as inventories because the main objective is to resell them. Okay, so they will not meet the definition of IAS 16, property, plant, and equipment, and it will also not meet the definition as IAS 40, investment property. Okay,
okay, so thank you.
all right, great. So I will see you tomorrow once again. Okay.